Hello, I'm Mike Ford, a solicitor here in Wrigleys Charities and Social Economy team, and welcome to the first in Wrigleys Solicitors series of podcasts aimed at breaking down employee ownership and discussing why it could be the right option for your business. Over the coming sessions, we will be exploring what employee ownership is and the different structures that are available to you, why you might want to think about transitioning to employee ownership, what the benefits can be, how employee ownership can safeguard the future of your business, and how does this impact on the ongoing management of the company itself. The series will finish with a look at the Employee Ownership Trust. So back to this introductory session, where we will be covering the fundamentals of employee ownership and why it's an attractive option for any size of company to consider when looking at succession planning and the future of the business. At its base level, employee ownership is exactly what it sounds like. It's a way for the ownership of the company in question to be put, either entirely or partially, into the hands of the employees. There are different options available for structuring, which we will go over in due course, but the usual intention behind it is to provide for a structured and organised transition for retiring owners or founders, and as a way to encourage greater involvement and engagement from the workforce by giving them a greater say in what goes on. Management, through the directors and other officers of the company, retain day-to-day control over the running of the business, but employee ownership should lead to greater transparency in the company's operation. It gives the employees a sense of ownership and responsibility, which anecdotal evidence has shown leads to greater levels of productivity and resilience, and, if done well, enhances the culture and ethos of a business following any transition of ownership. It's very plausible to say that trade sales of a company or its business to competitors or to corporate buyers can often result in the culture and ethos of the target company falling away, as its ethics and practices may not align with the greater vision of the purchaser. This can lead to a change in practices, redundancies, and other efficiencies which can strip away what made the business successful in the first place, and sometimes even a move to another part of the country. Employee ownership is one of the fastest growing forms of business ownership in the UK, and as we've mentioned, research suggests that employee-owned businesses have a tendency to be more resilient, competitive, profitable, and sustainable. It's an excellent way of securing the long-term future of a business, with a more engaged and committed workforce due to the fact that they are consulted more and have a greater vested interest in the success of the business itself. So how can you structure the transition? Well, there are three main forms of employee ownership. Firstly, there's the 100% trust ownership model, which is often called indirect ownership. Secondly, you can have direct ownership of the shares by the individual employees. Or, finally, there's a hybrid model, which includes both a trust and some individual share ownership. The most common form that we see is the indirect 100% trust-owned structure, as this is the simplest and cheapest to set up, and, if it relates to an existing business where the founders are retiring or setting up their succession plan, has capital gains tax advantages for the outgoing owners if structured correctly. In the trust ownership structure, a trust is set up to hold the majority or all of the shares in the company. Usually this is an employee ownership trust, which we'll refer to now as an EOT. The EOT will be created by way of a trust deed which will evidence the creation and also set out the various terms of the trust. The trust will then take ownership of the shares by way of a trustee. In order to enable smooth and simple management for the long term, it's usual for this trustee to be a newly incorporated company, which is usually limited by guarantee and not by shares. It will have directors appointed from both the management and workforce within the company itself, and very often an independent trustee director for greater transparency and accountability. These trustee directors can retire and be replaced from time to time without disrupting the trust's ownership of the shares. The price paid by the trust will need to be financially viable, and it's usually not paid in full on day one. The trust itself will have no funds, so it will either need to source these by raising third-party debt, or, as is far more usual, the company will make a gift to the trust which will be used to pay the price for the shares. Either in full or in part, with the balance deferred and paid out over a number of years from further gifts made by the company to the trust. In an EOT structure, there are certain tax benefits which can be obtained when specific statutory conditions are met, one of which is the EOT owning at least 51% of the shares in the operating company. If these conditions are met, then there should be no capital gains tax payable on the sale by the owner to the EOT, although we should point out that the capital gains tax liability is not extinguished and will instead be caught when or if the EOT decides to sell on the shares. An income tax-free bonus, although you should note that national insurance contributions do remain payable, is able to be paid by the operating company to employees in each financial year. As at the time of the recording of this podcast, this is up to £3,600 per annum. An alternative to the EOT structure is the direct ownership of shares by the employees. This does not come with the same tax benefits, which we've just noted, but it does give employees a more tangible stake in the ownership of the company, which can in some cases be more attractive. The company will need to decide how it wishes to enable the share ownership and how best to handle the administrative burden that accompanies this. The company can decide to gift shares to employees, which will have income tax and national insurance implications depending on the value of the shares. It could allow the employees to buy shares for at least market value, which will mean no tax implications. Or it could give employees options to acquire shares in the future, and here tax liabilities may arise when the shares are actually then acquired. Any of these options will lead to employees becoming direct owners, and the employees will therefore have the voting and dividend rights attached to the shares as set out in the company's Articles of Association. The direct ownership route allows employees to be incentivized by the potential capital growth in the value of the shares they own. We don't have time to go into details of the tax implications in this podcast, but tax advice will always be needed to ensure an efficient structure. We do want to note, however, that tax consequences for the employees can be mitigated if the share ownership is structured itself through either a share incentive plan, a save-as-you-earn options plan, a company share option plan, or under enterprise management incentive schemes. Care must be taken in structuring the share ownership, with restrictions on the number of shares to be issued and the methods for transfer and sale, so the company is able to control who becomes shareholders. It's therefore common to see in the Articles of Association provisions that require the employees to sell their shares internally to other employees or to the EOT, rather than to any third party. And that if they leave employment, they must offer the shares up for sale. And the same will often apply on the death of an employee, with the shares having to be sold by the estate back to the company. The final option available to you is the hybrid structure, which, as you may imagine, is a mix of both the EOT trust structure, or, if you're very philanthropic, even perhaps a charity with some direct ownership of shares by the employees. The capital gains tax and income tax-free bonuses can be achieved if the EOT meets the relevant statutory conditions, which will include at least 51% of the shares being held by the EOT. And then the balance of the shares not held by the EOT can be put directly into the hands of the employees by one of the direct ownership options noted earlier. If you'd like to know more, or if you're considering employee ownership for your company, please do not hesitate to contact one of the Wrigleys employee ownership team members. Our contact details are available at wrigleys.co.uk/EO. Thank you so much for tuning in, and please do come back next time where we'll be discussing why you might want to transition to employee ownership and what the benefits can be.